All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. This is the 2007 GRA Tag Business Launch Competition. We have 4 companies that are making presentations this afternoon. At the end of the day, one of those companies will be chosen by our panel of judges and will receive $300,000 in cash and services. It's quite a prize. Really help a company get airborne. All right, as I mentioned, we've heard from company number 1 of the 4, and now we move forward with company number 2. This is a company called Forecasting Grid Systems, software services to leverage grid computing technologies in financial industry trading sectors. Brainy stuff. We'll see what the potential is. Here's James Patton Jones from the company. Welcome.
Good afternoon. I'm James Patton Jones. I'd like to thank GRA and TAG for the opportunity to be here today. And now I'd like to share with you our plans for an exciting new business, Forecasting Grid Systems, to be launched here in Georgia. Forecasting Grid Systems will develop and market computer software to perform financial computations very, very quickly. As we'll see shortly, in the financial industry, there is a need for speed. When doing computations in mathematical finance, time is of the essence. Financial markets change by the second, especially during periods of high volume and high volatility. The more accurate the calculation, the longer it takes. But there's an emerging solution called grid computing. The concept of grid computing is that many hands make light work. If you can take a large, complex problem, a numerical problem, and break it into lots of pieces and run those pieces on lots of computers at the same time in parallel, then you can get to a solution much faster, often orders of magnitude faster. The more CPUs you have available for the problem, the faster the solution is. But there's still room for improvement. Many applications can run in a grid environment, yet few are what's called grid-enabled, or designed to take advantage of the grid itself. As a result, the human overhead of breaking the problem into pieces and then reassembling the results slows the overall solution of the problem. A slower solution means missed trades and lower profits. We're going to develop an integrated financial modeling system designed explicitly to use the power of grid computing. Our architecture will allow us to quickly tailor the computational software to the specific needs of our clients on a case-by-case basis. In particular, the first version of our modeling system will target so-called tailor-made impromptu contracts, those for which commercial software does not exist. Historically, such modeling software has been custom written by a mathematical programmer for a specific client. Our architecture will allow us to quickly deliver such custom solutions. Furthermore, by leveraging grid computing, the running of these models will be greatly accelerated. Another advantage of grid computing is the ability to leverage unused resources already within the organization. On average, an American corporation, 80 to 90% of the CPU cycles go unused every day. One of the aspects of grid computing is you can harness this unused resource and bring it to bear on important business problems. Our modeling system will provide smaller companies with an advantage over larger companies by being able to leverage the existing compute power within their organization coupled with our modeling system. This chart illustrates the power of grid computing. It compares running a Monte Carlo-based pricing valuation of a vanilla product on a single computer versus a small grid of 16 computers. We see that as the problem size increases, the benefit of grid computing becomes more apparent. One thing this graph does not show is that the speed increase is almost linear with the number of CPUs in the grid. Another recent example is at Charles Schwab, where grid computing was used to take a frequently run 4-minute portfolio analysis scenario and bring it down to 15 seconds. That's a 94% reduction in time to solution. A faster solution means a larger profit for the traders. This diagram illustrates the software stack of our model. Basically, there's several layers here, parts that we are going to be implementing and third-party software that we're going to be integrating. The top layer is a web interface that the client would use to specify the problem they wish to solve. The next layer takes that problem, breaks it into pieces to be sent into the grid software for for execution and then aggregates the results. The next layer is the actual mathematical calculator part that's doing the financial computations. The bottom layer is a third-party grid software system that we'll be leveraging to make this system work. Currently, Forecasting Grid Systems has 2 team members. Myself, as president and CTO, I'm a technologist and a serial entrepreneur. I'm co-founder of Altair Grid Technologies out in Silicon Valley, and I have 17 years of computer software experience, including 9 with NASA. While at NASA, I was involved in a particular grid computing project. I was instrumental in getting that technology transferred out of NASA into the private sector. We formed a business unit within my then employer to commercialize that software. Then we spun it out into a new standalone company, Altair Grid Technologies. That company is successful, profitable, and still growing with a global client base. I left Altair in 2005 to form my next company, Jones Research and Consulting, down in Newnan, Georgia. This consulting business allows me to fund the kind of research I want to do in the areas of, for example, how can you leverage grid computing into existing markets for a higher gain or a higher return? I'm joined in this venture by my colleague Charles Dillingham. He'll be our VP of Engineering. He has a Master of Science degree in Applied Computational Physics, plus degrees in both math and physics. He has 25 years of scientific programming, financial modeling, and mathematical simulation. He's worked on Wall Street doing the kind of financial modeling we've been talking about, as well as the Department of Defense and NASA as well. I like to say you don't have to be a rocket scientist to do computer software, but it doesn't hurt to have 2 of the founders be former NASA technical contractors. So I hope this sounds like a recipe for a successful business. What are the secret ingredients? Experience plus technology. We will leverage our experience in grid computing, financial modeling, and software development. And with that, we'll leverage proven third-party technologies of grid software and mathematical libraries, which will allow us to reduce risk and accelerate our product development. The developed intellectual property that we will produce will be protected by copyright and patents where applicable. We'll be competing within the financial segment of the worldwide grid computing market. In 2004, the TAB Group estimated this market would grow to almost $2 billion worldwide by 2011. In 2005, Insight Research estimated it would exceed $2 billion by 2011 in Europe alone. Last year, SCF Associates reported to the European Commission that this market segment would exceed $2.7 billion in Europe and $7.5 billion worldwide by 2011. This is a fairly large market. The total market is expected to grow to $25 billion by 2011. There are over a dozen major market segments within grid computing. Currently, the financial sector is the largest at 31% and the fastest growing. The overall grid computing market has been and is expected for the next couple of years to continue to grow at a compounded annual growth rate of 93%. Now, with a market of this size, there's definitely competition. We've identified 3 classes of competition, the first of which are existing financial software companies who wish to take their existing applications and get them to run better within a grid environment. The second class would be existing grid companies that simply want to sell generic grid software into the financial industry. The third, and probably our closest competitor, would be the hardware vendors' professional services organizations. They're often called upon to deliver a grid solution into the financial sector. They select a grid software layer, and then they assist these clients in getting the existing financial applications to run well within that environment. To successfully compete in this market, a company needs highly experienced personnel in the trading of derivative products, in mathematical modeling and simulation, and in the implementation and management of grid technologies. Our financial analysis architecture will be designed from the ground up to be integrated with grid computing. And lastly, by leveraging leading third-party financial and grid software tools, we'll be able to reduce our time to market and yet produce a unique product offering. That unique product offering is our financial modeling software package. We'll sell this package through perpetual licenses with maintenance the first year, recurring annually after that, providing professional services and training. and as a key point, custom solvers for those tailor-made derivative contracts to which modeling software does not currently exist. As a second focus, we'll offer our modeling system running on our own in-house compute grid on a subscription basis. Clients could access our grid over the web through an encrypted web portal as an alternative to buying the software and running it in their own organization. This will allow us to sell to clients that don't want to manage a grid themselves, or perhaps need additional resources during peak times. Or maybe they have too few systems to make a grid practical. Or maybe they simply want to test drive our software before they purchase. We will initially target small to medium-sized derivative trading companies, in particular those who are without any grid infrastructure currently, those who need an edge over the big guys, and those who lack in-house modeling or simulation expertise. We'll be able to quickly deliver tailor-made solutions via our financial modeling system. In addition, we'll be able to provide clients with a grid infrastructure and be able to help them get their existing financial applications to run within that grid environment so that they too can see the speed up offered by grid computing. As we go forward, our first new hire will be to assist in the implementation of our in-house grid and then to assist in the development of the web interface for that grid environment. The individual we have in mind for this position has both grid experience as well as project management experience with NASA and the Department of Defense. Following initial product development, we will seek to hire both a CEO and a vice president of sales with extensive experience within the financial industry. Our board of directors will comprise the founders, the CEO, and a representative of the outside investor. And we'll have an advisory board which will contain at least 4 experts within the financial industry, particularly a derivative expert as well as a mathematical modeling expert. Following product completion, our go-to-market strategy will include outsourcing marketing to a technology marketing firm familiar with the financial markets. Our advertising will target primarily the financial industry, but also the general grid computing industry. We'll leverage presentations at industry forums as well as the founders' speaking events and publications. Our sales will be via a direct sales force. From a funding perspective, we've identified 2 rounds of funding will be required. The first round will be to develop the alpha version of our software product. We estimate for that $300,000. Then, to finish the product, staff up, and go to market, we estimate $600,000. This $900K investment would be split between working capital requirements and capital expenditures. Our financial projections are based on a fiscal year of July 1 through June 30th. We've identified 4 revenue streams in this model, the first being the license fees for the software modeling system itself and the associated maintenance fees. We'll also have subscription fees for our product as a service offering. And then lastly, and a key aspect, will be the professional services, where we're delivering those custom, tailor-made solutions for the problems that there's not currently software for. We do not expect revenue the first year, as we'll be finishing the product. Revenues will then move from $1.7 million estimated in the second year to just over $12 million by fiscal year 2012. Our cash flow net income will be negative the first 2 years, positive in the third year, and we anticipate sufficient cash reserves by the 4th year to pay back the original investment. This chart illustrates the milestones and tells a little of where we are in this process. Thus far, we've received no outside investment. We have completed the high-level architectural design for our modeling system. We've identified multiple third-party mathematical libraries and financial libraries that we'll be able to leverage in the system. We've selected the grid software layer, the product from my former company, and have begun the process of setting up a partnership agreement with that company. We expect to have an alpha version of the product 8 months following funding, with a beta product 2.5 months after that, and the final product 2 months after that one. So what I've described here is what I consider to be a huge opportunity. Our financial forecasting system will provide an improved, faster approach to solving the modeling needs in the financial industry. We have a highly quantifiable and proven return on investment and a competitive advantage that clients will pay a premium for. Thus, we have all the ingredients for a successful business. We have a strong team, we have excellent experience, we have proven technologies, and with the capital investment, we'll be able to form and create the forecasting grid systems. Thank you for the opportunity to present this plan to you. I would now like to welcome my colleague, Charles Dillingham, to join me in addressing your questions.
James Patton Jones, ladies and gentlemen. How do you think it went? Let's turn it over to the judges now and find out what they think and what questions they have. Pete, to start with you.
Thank you. A quick question for you. Interesting concept. What marketplace participants have you tested the concept with, and what kind of feedback have you gotten from them?
Would you like to address that?
So what? I'm sorry, repeat the end of it?
Yeah, the question is, it sounds like an interesting concept. Assuming that you've done some market testing, spoke with some people who are in the derivative business who would, in theory, take advantage of faster computational results to leverage your platform. Can you give us some idea of some of the feedback you've gotten from people you've spoken with?
There are, as he mentioned, we can either adapt existing software that they have in-house, but we think that one of our major sources of revenue will be there's a lot of people that are creating exotic options that are not traded over the counter, that are not known things like Asian options and lookbacks and barrier options, but rather it's an options contract that's created on the fly between two parties. And we would develop the code to do the Monte Carlo simulation or whatever. As far as speaking to specific people, we have not spoken to anyone since we started brainstorming this idea. That will be part of the marketing outreach to find the people that need that.
Raj?
Is any particular reason you believe that these financial problems are particularly suited to parallel computing or grid computing?
I would say yes. Based on my experience in other industries, such as with aerospace, as well as the manufacturing industries where they have been able to leverage grid computing, the type of problem being solved in the financial segment is, in essence, a simpler problem, not from a complexity level, but that the problem is easier to break into pieces. Some things like weather modeling is fairly difficult to break into discrete parts, but a lot of the numerical simulations in the financial world can easily be broken into pieces which can be run on completely separate computers. That's what we call an EP class problem, which has very good benefits from grid computing.
Tom?
Half your revenue comes from the selling of your software, either directly or through using it as a service. But I'm not sure I understand exactly what your software is. I understand the concept of grid computing and how you're going to speed it up, but what's your application? What does it do specifically? It wasn't clear to me.
Okay. The basic application is a software system that allows a client to specify a particular financial, say a derivative problem that they wish to solve through the system. And then our software figures out how best to break it into pieces to submit it to a grid so that it can be solved very quickly. So it's pulling together several pieces to make it easier for the user to be able to specify the problem. Now, they could be using their existing in-house financial software through our system, in which case they'd basically be taking advantage of the grid layer only. Or if they have a need for one of these custom, tailor-made solutions, then they'll be able to use the same interface to handle those class of problems as well.
Okay.
Follow up? Or you say
Yeah,
something?
I think I understand. If I've written a software system and I want to make it run faster, you're going to help me do that. That part I get. But are you an FX solution? Are you a options trading solution? You know, these are all very different applications. And are you writing the application specifically and then trying to sell it to me as an FX trader?
Initially, we're targeting not the standard problems that are going to be solved over and over again that a lot of people may have, but rather the custom, the tailor-made derivatives, which maybe Charlie can give you an example of in a moment, so that it's the items that there is not off-the-shelf software right now that can do that because it's a custom contract between two parties, but that you need the solver to determine how best to price it, et cetera. So that's where we're really focusing. Instead of having the client hire an outside programmer to implement it or bring in-house modeling expertise to be able to do it, we'll be able to provide that solver to them and deliver it faster through our system because we'll have all the architecture in place to handle everything except for the particular equations or algorithms that they needed.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Paul?
James, do you think that there's a window of opportunity here and potentially you could be faced with product obsolescence? Because as the cost of computing goes down and the speed goes up, is there a point in time where what I could have on my desk could, in effect, produce what your product produces?
There's certainly that possibility, but based on the last 10 years of looking at different industries, as the compute power has gotten bigger, the problem sizes have as well. A recent stat I had from the U.S. Weather Service was they were asked by a person in Congress, how come the Department of Defense is asking for more compute resources than you are? And the response was, you can't afford the compute resources that it would really take to solve the weather problem properly. And the estimate was, how much do you need? We need about 10 times the installed compute power of the United States to correctly, completely predict the weather. So as the compute power gets faster, as the resources get faster, we simply scale up the problem so that we can get a more accurate answer. And I think that trend over the last 10, 15 years can certainly continue into the future.
Jake?
I have a related question. It is as Intels of the world keep on coming in dual core and quad core and all that stuff, maybe your target market will keep on shrinking. Your example is very right. To do some very specialized problem, you need lots of computers, but maybe 95% of the market wouldn't need it, and you may be trying to chase the market that's too niche, too specialized, and doesn't have standard software. It's a custom software in every case, which means lower gross margins, more work.
Well, if I could respond to the idea of shifting from CPUs to multi-cores on a CPU, I think it's an analogous situation. Whether the vendor is making more CPUs or putting more cores within it, I think that's how they're achieving the linear or that exponential growth that we've been seeing over the last 25 years in the computer industry. So I'm not sure that shift to cores would change that at all. Yeah.
Okay. But you see, the parallel computing, grid computing is out there for the last 20 years. The craze of the world, many computing companies came. There's no mainstream billion-dollar company out there that's doing a business in that area.
Correct. Yeah,
Still
the business
fragmented,
model has shifted.
small.
Yes, it certainly shifted over to grid computing as a model. And if we see market projections of upwards of $25 billion by 2011, the market analysts seem to think that the use of grid computing is going to continue to grow at this, 93% CAGR over at least the next 4 to 5 years.
Cynthia?
Is there, focusing on the financial modeling, is there a risk that companies would not want you to be working with their competitors, so you really have a very limited market?
That is certainly a risk, and that's one of the things we've talked about is how would we best market this solution? If we do a good job of marketing it, then people want to know, well, how, if everybody's got your great software, how are we going to be competitive? So I think it's going to make for an interesting marketing approach of how do we leverage key clients without having to name them or show that they're part of a larger club. Yeah.
Sort of back to this question of the software itself and your core expertise, which is clearly in the grid computing side. Why wouldn't you, I mean, it's almost like you're selling an infrastructure product. When you go to your sales and marketing strategy, why would you not be out selling to the different software companies to integrate it into their solution versus sort of an end product sale?
In my experience of selling grid software into different markets, we see there's two basic approaches to get a tight integration between the client's needs and the grid software layer. Most of the grid software companies today are selling a generic solution, and some of them are working with specific third-party vendors to get those, like the financial apps, for example, to work well within a grid environment. There's the other side would be the individual third-party applications trying to leverage that grid capability themselves. What I'm trying to do is do both sides. I'm trying to take the advantage of the grid layer at the bottom by starting with one of these generic grid solutions, but then crafting software around it to make it specific to the financial market, to make it easier to deploy this class of problems, the custom derivative tailor-made options that Charlie could speak to. Maybe we give an example of one of those.
Yeah, incidentally, we're not reinventing the wheel. there's a multitude of software libraries, some for money, some are open source, that we can simply incorporate. And like if somebody wants to know the price of an Asian option, you call that library to do the computation. An example of the kind of tailor-made option that's not traded over the counter, I was doing consulting for a guy with a company based in London, and he was creating a contract between him and the guy coming in with a ship of oil or copper. They would come up with this contract where one of the options, for example, was sort of a cross between a look-back option and an Asian option, which I could describe in more detail if you wanted to hear it. But there is no existing software. I mean, he made this option up. There's no existing software to compute it. And he didn't have anybody in-house that could do that. That's why he hired me. And I think there's a lot of little to mid-sized guys out there like that. And that's what our marketing people need to dig for us. And I'm sure that there's a huge market for that. We just need to get in touch with those people.
So in this example that you use, I'm going back to one of the slides where you articulated kind of who you're competing against. And you said one of your primary competitors are companies that offer grid solutions. So what would compel, a potential customer to utilize your service and capabilities versus one of those other grid solution providers?
Well, I think one of the differences that we'll be able to show is that while a company that's got a general grid solution, one size doesn't always fit all. That you can deploy any one of these grid solutions in any environment, but the level of effort to get the applications that are specific to that environment to run well within that grid varies by industry. Are you doing CFD computations? Are you doing what kind of mathematical modeling, or whichever? So one of our advantages would be that we would be solely focused on this financial industry, and all the infrastructure we built on top of our grid system will be to target the financial industry and make it easier to deploy solutions for that, which means there's a certain amount of value add to it, but also our entire expertise will be focused in the client's area of expertise, as opposed to some of the other grid solutions. It's like they're experts in grid, but they don't know about the client's industry per se. So by bringing together people that are focused on a single industry, we feel we can deliver a better solution to the end client.
Yeah, you've got great credentials from a computing side, but you're trying to apply that to the financial industry. Do you see a problem kind of trying to convince your customers that you've got enough expertise on the financial side to be effective?
That's a very good point. That one of the things I showed in the slide is that we know we need to bring on a CEO and a VP of sales with strong strength in the financial services industry. They can provide that credibility to get us in front of the clients. We have the technology from a grid side and from the mathematical problem solving and the programming of financial. I mean, we got the technical side covered, but we recognize bringing in a high-power CEO with name recognition in the financial industry will be necessary.
Question, Charlie. You used a moment ago an example of a two-party transaction where there is no basis for an existing model. In that situation, what's important to the client? Do they really need a fast solution to that problem, or is it just getting an accurate solution? So is grid computing important to resolving that problem, or is any technology appropriate and it's more of a one-off that you guys have the expertise to help solve the problem, but speed is not of the essence?
The motivation of the client is, well, in the case of the example I gave, in this example, he wants to purchase this shipload of oil at either the average price of the first half of the month or the average price of the second half of the month. So you're looking back and you're averaging, so you got to look back in the Asian combined. He wants to know how much that option is worth. If I do my Monte Carlo simulation and come back and tell him it looks to me like it's worth X dollars, he'll offer the guy half of that for the option to choose that. The guy that's selling the oil is not doing the mathematics, so he figures, well, I'm getting this chunk of money for the option. However, my client is probably coming out ahead because he's paying less than that option is worth according to theoretical considerations. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I wasn't as interested in the particulars, just in that coming up with that answer Was the grid computing important, the speed to allow you to do that calculation quickly, or was it just the fact that you could do the calculation?
In the case of my client, I didn't have to do that calculation. I could take minutes to do it. That was not an issue. But in trading, when you're hedging portfolios, when you're doing arbitrage, when you're trying to lock in quick movements in the market that might be highly volatile, sometimes seconds are enough to make or break an opportunity, and that's where the grid, I think, would be very valuable.
Okay, there you go. That's company number 2 in our business launch competition. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Nice job. That's Forecasting Grid Systems. At the top of the hour, we'll come back with our third competitor of the day. That's Integrated Software Systems. Hope to see you then. Stick around. Be back at 3.